Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a conversation about the social, political, and cultural themes in Ragtime the Musical. My name is Naved Singh, and I'm the resident sound designer and engagement coordinator at Nashville Repertory Theatre. Ragtime is set during an unprecedented time in American history. The early 1900s were a time of Reconstruction, immigration, industrialism, racial and class discrimination, and artistic innovation. And through it all, a time of hope. In 2021, we are no strangers to living in unprecedented times. Gathered here on this panel tonight are some of the finest minds in fight for equity and giving voice to the voiceless here in our Nashville community. These are activists, educators, counselors, law officers, historians, and change makers from right here in your neighborhood. Nashville Rep is so lucky to be able to safely bring this important, relevant musical to audiences at TPAC November 11th through the 14th with our first staged production in over a year and our return to the Polk stage with our largest show in over 20. Tickets are going fast, so remember to head over to nashvillerep.org to reserve yours today. Without further ado, and after many technical difficulties, I am going to hand things over to our moderator for tonight's panel, Emmy Award-winning senior producer at Nashville Public Television and Nashville Rep board member, LaTanya Turner.
Thank you, Naved. All I can say is, isn't technology great? Thank you for the introduction and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for those of you who are hanging with us despite the technical difficulties, because this is a really important conversation for our community about some very challenging issues, some disturbing issues about racial equity and social justice in our community. And I promise you, it really does have something to do with Ragtime the Musical. And you'll find out why and how as the conversation progresses. But I really hope we'll have a robust discussion with this amazing group of people that we've brought together to talk about these issues. I want to introduce them to you, and we're going to kick off the discussion with some questions. If you have a question down the road that you want to ask, at this point, I believe the best plan is for you to raise your hand in the reaction section. Naved, correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Actually, if you could just drop your question in the chat.
Okay.
That's probably the best way to do it.
Okay, if the chat is enabled, I'm not sure it is. But anyway, you work on that. We're going to start the questions in the discussion, okay? But we do want those of you who are listening and watching to have an opportunity to join us as the conversation progresses. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. If you would just kind of raise your hand and say hello as I introduce you. Dr. Phyllis Adams, professor of speech and theater and the dramaturg for Ragtime. She is a professor at Motlow State Community College. Claude Gadabuke, raise your hand. Hello. Claude.
Hello.
Co-founder of Black Lives Matter Nashville. Dr. Carol Van West.
Good evening.
The state historian for Tennessee, and he's the director of the Center for Historic Preservation at Middle Tennessee State University. Commander Carlos Lara.
Good evening.
With the Metro Nashville Police Department, Office of Community Outreach and Partnership. And finally, Crystal Owens. Hello. Licensed professional counselor with Red Cedar Psychotherapy. Thank you all for being with us for this important conversation. Dr. Adams, let's start with you. And I think it's important, you're the dramaturg for Ragtime, for this production of Ragtime. And I want you to explain what a dramaturg is first, so people don't think I'm cursing you or calling you a bad name, because a lot of people don't know that word and it's kind of an awkward word. So what does a dramaturg do and what are you doing for this production?
Thank you. First of all, Tanya, thank you for having me. Thank you for rallying this impressive group for this chat tonight. I'm honored to be a board member of the Nashville Rep, and I'm equally as honored to be the dramaturgist for Ragtime. I talked to my buddy, Lee Summers in New York, who's on Broadway, and he says, "Oh, you're the script doctor." So I think that's how Broadway sees it. But really what research says is that the dramaturgist is a collaborator who works with the director as well as with the cast. And my primary purpose is to help the cast to really understand the composition of the representation of the main elements of the drama or of the performance. So I work in connection with the director early on, talking about the wholeness of the historical perspective, the cost of things back in 1906, the kinds of things that people owned, what they had in their households, but helping the cast to really understand those 6 elements that make up what Aristotle talked about analyzing the play. So I help them with plot and theme and character and language and music and spectacle, but understanding the whole storyline. So I'm that link between the director and the cast, and I'm excited to sit in that seat.
And I know you're doing a great job with that. I just want to ask you, because of the social themes, the racial equity themes in this show, are you able to help those artists draw on current events?
Absolutely.
Developing
we had about an hour and a half, 2-hour session a couple of weeks ago when I first had presence there, and just talking about what the themes are and why is it that ragtime is just so relevant today. And it's relevant today because we are facing many of those same issues that they did in 1906. Issues like what? Sense of belonging. Issues like trying to understand gender inequalities, struggles with stability and meaning, imprisonment, immigration issues, the impact of technology, police brutality, things that unfortunately we've been living the last years here in our communities and the communities at large. So it really wasn't a hard stretch for me, because one of the things that I found is that the cast was very intentional and they really understood those issues. And young people today, believe it or not, are rooted in what's going on in the world. They're walking the walk and talking the talk. So they could easily connect to those issues. And once we said that, you could see the light bulb go off, and they were in the trenches and really ready to get the work done.
Okay, well, that makes your job easier, but it's sad to say we're still dealing with those issues. And actually, that's what the name of this discussion is, Ragtime to Right Now, because there's a connection. And I'm going to bring in Dr. West as a historian to talk a little bit about what was happening here in Tennessee during that era, especially with race relations. And I've heard this period described as the progressive era or the Gilded Era, but in talking to you a while back, you said you have a different way to describe it. So tell us what was happening in Tennessee and how you describe this period.
Well, if you want to get to the truth of the matter, it is the Jim Crow era. This is when, exactly at the sort of same time period of the musical, the late 1890s, the early 1900s, this is when the systematic elimination of the African American vote took place. We call those the disfranchisement laws of the 1890s. You started to have the pressure to move Black institutions out from the heart of the city, like Rogers Williams University, one of our major Reconstruction institutions, a very successful school, was originally located next to Vanderbilt, where Peabody College is today. So they were pressured out. And, you know, African Americans didn't stand for it. You had different responses from different groups, but I think the most important one was the Nashville streetcar strike of 1905 to 1907, when they tried to impose segregation on streetcars, and people said, no, we just won't ride. And this is a full 50 years before the much more famous Montgomery bus boycott. So you got a lot of pressures here in Nashville. You've got the arrival of new, more Eastern European immigrants into the city, but you've got worsening race relations and African Americans doing everything they could to fight back against that. So a flammable period, yes. A period that some want to call the progressive era. Well, it's progressive, I guess, if you look at it in a way that you deny the biggest trend in the history of the period, and that would be Jim Crow segregation.
Okay. Thanks for that insight on what was happening here. We'll revisit that in a minute, but let me get Claude, got a bouquet in. Claude, you are, as we said in the introduction, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Nashville. You are a Black man, obviously. You're also an immigrant. So before we sort of connect the dots to this production, tell us just a little bit about your story and what you share with people about those two characteristics and how they've impacted your life.
My story starts in Rwanda, where I fled a war where this war started in 1990 with a group of Rwandans who were exiled, started a war, invaded Rwanda, committed major atrocities, killed thousands of people, and then it led into a genocide. The genocide itself was, so the country is Rwanda that I'm talking about. The genocide happened in 1994. It was not just because of this war. That war didn't start just in 1990. There was some historical grievances that were unaddressed, and they caused the war. The war turned into a genocide. That genocide produced another genocide in next door Congo 2 years later. And these atrocities are still going, especially in the Congo. And so I fled the genocide, I fled the war, I fled those atrocities, and ended up in the US, ended up in Nashville, where my father went to an HBCU, Meharry Medical College. And that's how we ended up in Nashville. When I got to Nashville, I noticed, so I was an ESL student, English as a second language. I couldn't go to the school. So I lived in North Nashville, which was the ghetto. It's getting gentrified now and changing. But I lived on the street, the corner of 17th Avenue and Herman Street, which 17th Avenue is where Daniel Hambrick was shot by a policeman, Officer Delk, in front of MLK High School. So I lived in that area, but I went to school in Green Hills. And going to school in Green Hills, I noticed the difference. What I call the police occupation of North Nashville and East Nashville and the ghettos, the surveillance and everything, compared to Green Hills, where there was barely any, other than the cop that was at the school, you didn't see any presence of police. You didn't hear sirens all the time. You didn't see the racial profiling. And then I eventually experienced those things. So in Rwanda, because of discrimination and because of unaddressed grievances, historical differences, there was major violence, ethnic violence. Here in the US, then I experienced new things like racism and police brutality and racial profiling and those type of things. And so, the other thing that that connects those dots is I had a story of surviving the genocide as a young boy, including digging my own grave at one point. But I hadn't connected the dots with the issues that Black people were facing here until I saw the shooting of Amadou Diallo in 1999 by the New York police, and started seeing the racial profiling for what it was and everything. And reading the book of Frederick Douglass really opened my eyes to how you need to connect the global dots in order to see real change to real major issues. So that's my story. The Frederick Douglass story is what really connected it for me.
And I just want to ask you real quick, because I want to get Crystal in and Commander Laura, but what was your experience? Were you surprised as an immigrant to find how you perceived Black men in particular to be treated in this country?
Yes, it was a surprise. You know, when you're outside of the US, a lot of what you see and experience are things that come through the media. And before I came to Nashville in 1995, so everything was through television. It was, it's not like social media now where you can see so many other things outside of mainstream media. And it was the, I'm losing the word, the stereotypes, the media stereotypes of Black people, you know, as criminals, Black men especially, as, you know, troublemakers and those type of things. But what I experienced in the community wasn't that. It was people who were just living their lives for the most part. And you also have this image through Hollywood of an almost perfect place. You know, you think you're coming to Hollywood, and then you get here and you get hit with realities of, you know, sometimes getting, you know, at soccer games, being driven out of town because of, you know, racial attacks and racist attacks, you know, the sheriff driving me and my friends out of town to make sure that we are safe, you know, things like that.
That sounds very, very much like the story in Ragtime, which I don't want to give it away too much to people who haven't seen it. But one of the storylines around the central character is a Black man who is under pressure and oppression and pursued by the authorities. We're going to circle back to you in a minute. Commander Laura, I want to bring you in because, you know, the things that Claude has just described are real for many Black people in this country, in this community. Many view policing as racialized, and you have the job of trying to change those opinions and build relationships, if I understand correctly. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what the Metro Police Department has acknowledged about inequities in policing.
Sure. Again, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation. You know, Mr. Gadabuka, and all of those who have dealt with, you know, the traumas and the different issues and things that they've had to deal with over the years. You know, police work is going a different direction, but it's been somewhere that has really caused a lot of people a lot of anguish and a lot of issues over the years. You know, you're looking at the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, just all these decades of the way that policing was done. It was, there was a lot of racism. There was a lot of people that being hurt, being traumatized, and a lot of those people are still around. You know, you've got mothers and grandmothers and grandparents that are still here that, you know, faced a lot of those different struggles and a lot of those different, you know, issues, and the way that they were treated was many times inhumane, and it was just wrong. And I think what we're trying to do now is policing is going from a different direction. It used to be a lot more of, you know, we're going to enforce the laws and we're going to do it the way we want, and we're going to go in your community and tell you what the problem is, and we're going to tell you how we're going to fix it. And you know, it was very authoritative. You know, we're the police. You're the citizen. What we tell you to do is what you do, and that's it. And you don't have any recourse. And I think that that's something that we're trying to change. We see that, you know, policing is going from a enforcement to a community outreach, where we're trying to get to know the people that we serve. I know for our office here at the Office of Community Outreach and Partnerships, when the Chief Drake was appointed the full-time chief of police here in Nashville, one of the first things he told me, he said, I want to connect with the communities that we've never had communication with. He's like, I want to start building relationships. He didn't want things to continue the way they were going. So we built this office and we started working with different communities that in the past we've never had either had a really bad relationship with, no relationship with, or we had a good relationship and then it went south. And so a lot of those communities are immigrant communities. I work a lot with the Hispanic community, the Kurdish, who's the largest, you know, Kurdish population in the country outside of Kurdistan is here in Nashville. You got over 20,000. You've got an Ethiopian community, which is over 20,000. We've got a Somali community, which is huge. And we're trying to connect with these different communities and trying to go, hey, we want to work with you. We're not going to tell you what we need to do. We want you to tell us what you think we need to do to help you and to serve you. And that's the direction we're going. We're listening now. We didn't listen a whole lot before. I think we just did a lot of things and not really realize the damage we were doing. Now we're trying to get guidance and insight from the leaders of those communities, trying to figure out what can we do to serve? What is it that you need from us? And give us some ideas of how we can do it, you know, how we can serve. And we want them to work with us. We've got to build trust. And if I do it myself, ain't nobody going to trust me, you know. But if I do it with people that are well respected in those communities and we partner together, it gives us more credibility, because if we can gain their trust, we're going to gain the trust of those that they serve as well. And so again, we're really changing the way we police, you know, again, reimagining the police work. The chief has 3 pillars: organizational excellence, community engagement, and precision policing. We're not focusing like we did in the past in problem areas. We used to just flood areas. I know you used to see, if you were in Nashville, you'd see these cars, you know, Nolensville Road and Murfreesboro and Dickerson Pike, and there were these unmarked cars just lighting up the streets, stopping everybody. And we were hoping that we'd find somebody that was doing something wrong. You know, we'd catch the bad guys. And Chief Drake said, we're not doing that anymore. We're not focusing on the problem areas. We're going to focus on the problem people. We're going to focus on the specific people that are causing the issues, because problem areas are problem areas because of the problem people that are there. Once you take those problem people out, those areas ain't so much of a problem anymore. And that's one of the things that we're looking at, is who are those people that we can identify that are causing the most issues, and then focus our resources on them, rather than traumatizing or rather than alienating the community that we were trying to serve. So that's just a little bit, but there's a whole lot more, but that's what I've got.
Yeah. Well, you've got your job cut out for you, that's for sure. I mean, I think obviously you have a frame of reference as a Hispanic man and a perspective that I'm sure is very helpful. And the police chief, the new police chief, is an African-American man. But we all know that there are systemic problems that go beyond you, and even if you go outside of Davidson County, I know of situations where they are not taking those same steps. So what is your objective, and what can you do to sort of change the institutionalized bias and targeting that might go beyond your office?
I think the things that we need to, there's only so much we can do. I think partnering and with the community is key. Opening the lines of communication. One of the things that I think we've got to remember is that there are hundreds of police departments around the country, hundreds. Some of them are elected, some of them are appointed. You've got small departments, you've got big departments. You've got it in certain parts of the country. Things are different wherever you go. One of the things I always ask people is, judge us by what we're doing and not by what's happening across the country. Because if you see something in California, that's happening in California, or Chicago, or, you know, Ferguson. Those things are happening there. Every department is different and is led differently. They have different leadership. They have different people telling them what their goals are. Our focus is to serve the communities that we serve here, that to better serve the communities that we serve here in Nashville. We want to make sure that there's nobody in this city that feels that's afraid of coming to the police when they need help. Okay. We want to make sure that anybody that needs assistance, that we can connect them to the resources that maybe we don't have them, but we can connect them to those resources that they need. We want crime to go down. We want to better the quality of life of people. You know, you go certain parts of the city and it's miserable. These people are trying to live their lives, and there's, you know, violence, you know, gun violence, there's poverty, there's so many different things that we need to address. And it's not a police problem. And that's the thing. It's not just a police problem, it's a community problem. We need a lot of different people to come in and help. Police are not going to fix the problem. You know, we're here for a specific reason, and we're here to try to keep people safe. But the issues that we deal with are issues that have to do with a lot of different areas, from poverty to education to medical, you know, to the healthcare system, to housing, to mental health. A lot of different pieces of the puzzle need to come together and work together to make real change. And we're just one little piece of that.
Well, I think a lot of people listening would agree, because I think that's what the movement around reform police is about. The police shouldn't be all those things. And speaking of all the components that you just mentioned, let's bring in Crystal, who is a mental health professional. And one reason we're we talked about policing is because there is a very powerful theme in Ragtime around policing that is targeted and racialized and ends, unfortunately, let me just say that. So, but Crystal, you're actually a part of the production as a mental health professional. Tell us what your role is, and is there an issue around racial trauma with a show like this?
So, in the same way that Commander Laura was speaking on relationships, that's actually been a big part of my role with this production, has been able to come in and assist the cast as they, embark on such an emotionally heavy production and helping build relationships. I had the privilege of being able to be a part of their first night together, when everyone is feeling some angst, some anxiety about, maybe coming together on this big production, of course, as you mentioned, first since the pandemic, and really begin to open up that conversation about traumas, about lived experiences, about fears. So it was it's been a really powerful process, and it's one that I'm going to be continuing actually later on this week, as a matter of fact, just to continue that conversation as the cast has gotten into some of the really heavy pieces, parts of the show. Again, don't want to give too much away, but of course, that the theme around this has to do with some very real points, some real lived experiences. And it's important to pay attention to not only performing this great work, but also taking care of yourself throughout that performance. It can be very heavy to talk about something that's fictitious, but actually might be quite real and very factual for many people. So that's been my role.
Well, it's good that you're there to help, because some of these issues are really challenging for people, and artists sometimes really get immersed in those characters and can feel it more than you might imagine. There is some discussion or debate around whether shows like Ragtime should, that we should be at a time like this doing shows that depict such racial and trauma, social injustices, and things that are difficult for so many populations when some of us are living it every day in real life. And Dr. Adams, I just wonder if you have some thoughts about that as a theater professional, and as someone who may have even had conversations about the merit of these kinds of works. Oh, and before you answer that, I just want to make sure if Naved or someone with the rep can clarify if people can submit questions or comments, because I believe the chat may be disabled.
Yes, so you should be able to message hosts or co-hosts on the messenger
Okay.
chat there in the corner. So if you could actually just direct your questions to the user
Nashville Rep.
and I will relay your questions to the panel.
Okay, good. So you all heard that. Please feel free to share questions or comments, and don't miss an opportunity to engage with this wonderful panel. So Dr. Adams, you were getting ready to talk about depicting these, using art to depict these kinds of themes and issues.
Often people want to kind of brush some things under the rug and say, let's not talk about that, things that aren't pretty. I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King says that one of his purposes was to comfort the uncomfortable and to make the comfortable uncomfortable. And as a professor, I just know that we've got to always be able to speak our truths. And one of the things that in dealing with and listening to the cast, particularly some that were much younger, a lot of people are saying, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that happened. And I can even step a little bit deeper into that, because, you know, like I know when I first learned that the rep was going to do ragtime, I knew very clearly that was a piece that I wanted to teach this semester, because it's not a piece that you just need to go see. It's a piece that you need to really understand. And college students and high school students and middle school students might not completely understand that. But older people in the community might not understand that. So I know it was really important to have conversations like this on the front end and then see it in conversations on the back end. But I'm also a bit pleasantly surprised when I listen to students being able to really unpack what they were seeing and reading and talking about the pain of it. But, you know, we learn from our pain, and we learn from the things that are beautiful as well. I can remember being at one of the rehearsals and just listening to some of the cast members, and there's language in there that's not always pretty, and language that's degrading, and instances that are degrading. And Crystal, I think you were there that same day, or I was there the same day with you. And one of the things that we as thespians know, that when you assume a role, and I see John Royals there, he can speak to that as a director as well. When you assume a role, you're going to be in that role for weeks while you're actually in the rehearsal.
Mhm.
But is that really who you are? Are you really that ugly fireman that's spewing out that nasty language in ragtime? So one of the things that I think cast members and readers and students are dealing with is, oh, it's kind of really easy for you to really say those words because they're really who you are, because you got to be believable on stage. So going into this, realizing that some of the characters are historical characters, some are fictional, and just being sure that you understand and that you're able to make the distinction between them both. So what I always say to the readers is, you got to sit in it for a while. And sometimes it's really raw, and you can't turn ragtime on and off. And so the 6 weeks or so that they've been in rehearsal, I know it takes a lot out of them. So I know the beauty of a Crystal being there, helping with the mental health of it.
Mhm.
Students that I'm teaching, because I'm teaching it in a diversity class and in a couple of theater classes, are really speaking their truths, but they're also telling us things that they have experienced even in their young life. You know, we've got biracial students all day long. And so they understand what that feels like, what that looks like.
Mhm. How can this be
I-
helpful for the audiences?
How can these conversations be helpful?
Well, or the show and its themes.
To
I mean,
make
you've
comfortable, to comfort the uncomfortable, and to make the comfortable uncomfortable. It's real, and it's the truth. And it's 1906 that it was actually on that stage for the first time, but it's unfortunately 2021 and we're still living that. And so it lets us know that we have work to do, and we can't turn a blind eye and say that it's not really going on, because it is. And if it hasn't happened to you or me, it's happened to people that we know, and people
and
that
I
we
think
know
it helps to sort of humanize
It
some of the
does.
challenges.
You
And just
know,
like, yeah,
it's
go
just
ahead.
like and again, I know we don't want to give the whole premise of the play itself, but it's like some of the characters have no names. The name is mother and the name is father, because it's anybody's mother, it's anybody's father, it's anybody's brother. So it's all of us. And
Mhm.
so that's the community of the world. And even if you have not experienced it in your bubble, if you unpack it enough, I think you can speak to some issues that have touched you at some point. So it's speaking the truth and being very intentional in doing that. And I really applaud the rep and I said that early on, because I'm a Nashvilleian, And I know the makeup of Nashville, Tennessee, and I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to say, why are we doing this? We're doing this because it's, and I said that in my presentation, it's needed, it's necessary.
Thank you for that insight, Dr. Adams. Claude, how do you see the impact or relevance of a program like this? Because you're in it. I mean, as a co-founder of Black Lives Matter, you've been out in the marches, you've organized immigrant organizations to join in with some of the demonstrations in 2020. How can art like this be a tool or a resource, or can it, for your work as a social activist?
And so I'm involved in a lot of activism, not only in Nashville, but also globally. And I always say, when you get the artists and the religious people in a movement, you're getting there. And it's important because art is transcendent. Art gets to everybody. And people get to see that 115 years later, since the time of Ragtime, we are still living those things. We have the school to prison pipeline that we're living. This is real. We have mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. If anybody's read the book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, America in the Age of Colorblindness. So many people want to look the other way. And that's why I love the remarks by Dr. Adams. The truth, they say the truth shall set you free. The truth shall set us free. And there's nothing better than being free, but to be free, you have to be truthful. And these experiences are important to bring to the fore. The world, one of my mottos is the world must know. So even those who would like to hide in their own comfort, look the other way. Don't pay attention to the issue. These are systemic issues. These aren't individual. A lot of times people will say, they'll try to individualize it. Every cop is not a bad cop. Comply and nothing will happen to you. Those type of things. This isn't an individual issue. This is a systemic issue. That's why it's lasted this long. And the system has to be addressed. In order to address something, you got to know what it is, what's happening with that thing, in order to actually do something with it. And I'm sure, Crystal, being a therapist, that you've got to diagnose something first and be truthful about it in order to actually address it. And so bringing in place like this, using art to display and show the problem and have people live it, put human faces to it, as you said, and make it real to people, I think is important. I look back at, just to close this remark, the film When They See Us, which, again, the issue of Black men and Black people and minorities and immigrants and people is not a Nashville issue alone. It's an American issue. It's an issue all over the US. And when you look at the impact that When They See Us has had, I think art has shown a big light on these issues. And I think it's important to have plays like this and art like this to continue to shine a light on it so that we can deal with it, so we can face it. As Mr. Baldwin said, everything must be faced in order to be addressed. If it's not faced, it won't be addressed. We got to face it.
Yeah, James Walwood, that's a great quote. Dr. West, why do historians, or let me rephrase that. Why is it that our history education in this country has omitted so much of this? What can be done to make sure that we are facing history in a way that is more accurate and truthful and hopefully enlightening?
You want to go to the actual primary sources. You want to find the truth. And we have to face the reality. This was the era that began the big lie. And the big lie was that of white supremacy. That, well, we didn't need to listen to the African-American historians. We didn't need to listen to a public intellectual like W.E.B. Du Bois, who actually had walked the streets of Nashville, had gone to the outskirts of Alexandria, Tennessee, and taught school children there himself in the 1880s. You know, he not only talked the talk, he walked the walk. And he said in 1902 in his classic book, The Souls of Black Folk, that the issue of the 20th century was the issue of the color line. Well, unfortunately, that is still the issue today, you know, some 120 years later. And, you know, we just, historians, yeah, we're complicit in this. For a long time, books by Du Bois, books by other people like Carter Woodson, just a whole host of different authors put the truth out there, but they didn't read it because, well, that's by a Black man or a Black woman. We don't need to read that.
Or it got banned.
Yeah, or it got banned.
And there's
You know,
still
you
banned.
didn't have the chance to read it. Well, you know, one good way to keep the truth from coming out is to not even have public libraries in Black neighborhoods or Hispanic neighborhoods. And that used to be the case in different parts of the country. So, you know, we are always trying to build the more perfect union. And it's not just a continual story of improvement. There are blockages and violence along the way. And, you know, again, I'm like the other panelists. I love Ragtime. I love the novel. I love the movie. I love the musical, because it all brings forth a period of history that for the most part, people don't want to think about. But if they would take in that art and think of what it means, then issues like the Tulsa race riot that was just a massacre of an entire African-American community would not be news to them. That would be something that they knew about.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I want to make sure that we are addressing any questions or comments from the audience. Naved, is there anything, as I can keep going here, but I don't want to
Absolutely.
omit that.
We have Salia McKee, who is just saying, Dr. Adams, thank you for your insightful comments. Again, if any audience members do have any questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat there and just send them to the username Nashville Rep.
Mm-hmm. And if you want your question to be anonymous, you could just put that in the beginning, although nothing to hide here. Let's be transparent. Let's just have a frank, robust conversation. Is there anything, but I want to turn to a little bit more of the themes of the show, but quickly, Commander Laura, is there anything you want to add about this art and how it might even be useful to you and what you're doing?
I'll tell you, I didn't know anything about Ragtime. I'm from Boston, so I'm not from here, and so I'm still learning a lot of the history from Nashville and the South, and again,
well,
the North
Boston had its own problems.
And I was going to say, I'm probably from one of the most segregated cities in the country. It's definitely got its own problems. But I think, you know, looking at the script and looking at it, there's a lot of things there that I didn't even know. And I think that's really good for us to be able to understand, even myself, some of the history and some of the things that are put in kind of in a way that you can understand it. You know, you see it in real life, you see this play, you read it and you actually look at the script and you go, wow, it makes it more real, and it helps you to empathize with those who have dealt with that. And so I think it's just something that, you know, from a law enforcement perspective, me as a law enforcement officer, I can look at it and go, you know, I understand better why people feel the way they do. And I think that is something that we as a department, and again, when you look at the department, it's getting younger and younger. And a lot of the people that are in the police department now here in Nashville, and not even from Nashville, the majority are from other places. Now that you're looking at it, they're moving here. This is the IT city, so everybody wants to come here. So they don't really understand a lot of the history, and they don't understand what they're getting themselves into when you go into the police department and dealing in some of these communities that have had a lot of bad experience with the police. And so seeing something like this and watching something like this, a play like this, really kind of puts things in perspective and helps you understand kind of the history of where we are and where the city's come to. So I really enjoyed reading some of it, and was a little bit shocking, and it was tough to look at, because again, it's people's lives, and I'm in a minority just like everybody else. I'm grew up in a Hispanic family up in Boston, and I understand racism. I've been, treated the same way. I've been discriminated against, all those things, called every name you can think of, because I'm Hispanic, and then they think I'm African American. I get it. And so I think those that don't understand that are the ones that don't really get it.
Well, hopefully we can bring more of those people into the light, bring them into the light.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Crystal, anything you want to add? And then I want to talk. Oh, Nevada, I see you pop up. Do we have a question?
Yes, we do have a question for Crystal, and it reads, how do you feel overall about the Jim Crow laws, specifically of the time in ragtime? And maybe I can take it a step further and ask, the moments in the show itself associated with those laws. Just sort of what has your overall feeling been interacting with the cast on working on something in the age of Jim Crow?
And music and the slurs, the racial slurs and all of that. I'm sure that question was referring to that. Yes, Crystal.
Yeah. When I was, brought in as a support person, one of the first things that I did was find all the ways that I can immerse myself in this play without actually being a part of it, reading the script, watching the movie, reflecting on it, doing research before I ever stepped foot in front of the group to talk about this. And even in those moments, my own lived experiences, as well as my prep for this, I was still kind of floored by the fact that this was real life and is real life for many folks still. If you have the opportunity, which I hope many of you will, to see this in some form or read about it in some form or another, just to see the stark contrast of many plots within it, from the things that the people are wearing to the way that they are, the ways in which they are justified where other groups are not. It's just so impactful. And for me, looking at that as a Black woman, as a mother with a Black son, with a Black husband, those are things that hit home for me just as a person. So I can only imagine what that is like for our cast, who not only lives that, same experience, but is also having to kind of flip back in time and be a part of that for 6 weeks or more. So it's very powerful. And I know I'm not the only one who feels it.
Well, and there are also other lines or themes of oppression in the story related to the Eastern European immigrants,
absolutely.
women. Yeah.
And it's such a diverse cast. And I think that's another thing to also remember as we're talking about, why are these plays even done, in present time? Because there is such a diversity, there's, non-white characters, there's immigrant characters, there are Jewish characters. There's such a diverse group of people who are being impacted in this play, just like there's a diverse group of people who have impacted every single day. Mm-hmm. So, as you kind of pose and kind of think on that question, why, the cast even mentioned their reasons why are to also bring about awareness to their own communities so that they can see, why this is important. It's another resource for you to understand why these conversations are important, but it's also an opportunity to bring people together. It does not have to be a divisive performance. This can actually be something that brings community and builds community.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I agree with that. And you mentioned those other groups of people that are impacted by some of the social injustices in this story. And Dr. Adams, I just want you to jump in. Well, actually, this is for Dr. West, I think, because it's more of a historical question. To talk about the fact that right here in Nashville, in Middle Tennessee, there was very similar class divides and groups during this era. I mean, you talked some about African-American community, the streetcar boycott. There was a very vibrant and accomplished African-American community in Nashville at the time, but there were also Eastern European immigrants, and there were the wealthy Caucasians in the suburbs, correct?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is a real formative period in Nashville's history, the 1890s to 1920, because, you know, in 1909 or thereabouts, you start the formation of Belmead neighborhood and community to the west of Nashville. You have the sort of reorganization of space through segregation, and Rogers Williams University, again, a very distinguished college.
Tennessee State University came along around this era too, right?
Right, and you know, Roger Williams, they burned it down to move it out of downtown Nashville, and it goes and becomes American Baptist Theological Seminary, which of course is one of the training grounds for the young college students who led the Nashville sit-ins. TSU is created in 1912. Hadley Park is created as a separate park because, you know, African Americans could not go to Centennial Park, except for maybe one day out of a week. They certainly couldn't use any of the facilities much, even when they were there that one day. So you really have a change in Nashville. And within Tennessee, you have this heightened period of violence against Black men through lynching. Ed Johnson is lynched on the Walnut Street Bridge, even though the Supreme Court said, stop this. This guy needs to have, you know, due justice and his rights. And they, you know, no one did anything. The Supreme Court held the Hamilton County Sheriff in contempt. And, you know, they just laughed at him. When he went to serve his jail term for a few months, he came back and was treated like a hero. In Memphis, you have the lynching of L. Persons that leads to demonstrations in northern cities. And at the same time, you've got this influx of people. You do have the Eastern European immigrants who come in waves, not so much in the South as in maybe some northern cities, but certainly the demographics of Nashville are changing. And you have the migration from the farms into the factories of both whites and African Americans.
And that Eastern European influx is what formed Germantown, correct?
Well, that's part of that whole sort of North Nashville division between white and Black, between immigrants and African Americans, much like what they talk about in the movie. We're hardly New York City in that type of mix, but we are a very typical Southern city that several of them went through a similar type of development. So again, Ragtime always speaks to me because I could see that being said in Nashville as well as it's being said in New York City.
Yeah. Okay. Naved or someone give me some guidance here on how we're doing on time. I know we got a late start. So should we keep going?
Hey, yeah. So I'm actually not seeing any more questions. For some reason, my chat has kind of blurred out or something. So if you do have a question, I would ask that you can unmute and actually just ask it with your voice to our panelists. If not, again, yes, we did go over. So if we don't hear anything in the next, let's say like 15, 20 seconds, we will probably start to wrap up. I would also invite our panelists to make any closing remarks as well.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any questions right now, I think I want to get back to the actual show because I think it's very interesting that the show is called Ragtime, but it really doesn't have any ragtime music in it. The music is beautiful, by the way, the score, but I think, in my opinion, ragtime is sort of symbolic of a lot of the things that we've been talking about that happen in the show, that particular genre. If you're familiar with it. I mean, it's short, it's choppy, it's complex, it's syncopated. It didn't last for very long. Dr. Adams, why is this show called Ragtime?
It's all of that, and that's what students are wanting to know because they really didn't know ragtime music. You know, we hear it a bit just with that opening number, and so then we needed to unpack that. And you said just that it's ragged, it's short, it's choppy. It's not necessarily long lasting. It's syncopated, and it's exactly.
And it was rooted in African American music.
I'm sorry.
It was rooted in African American culture, I believe.
Right. And so then we go from the ragtime, and then we've got go back, and then open up with jazz. But music plays a significant role in ragtime, because music helps tell those stories, and students really got that when they were able to listen to the music, make them.
They understood the themes better.
Yes, absolutely it does. One of the things that I've had one of my classes to do, they've already done character analysis. And I wanted everybody, it was a small class, so I didn't want them to have the same characters. And so we were able to really unpack 15 characters instead of 2 people doing mother and 3 doing father, but they were really able to learn some things, not just about the dialogue, not just about their movement, because they not only read, they actually saw the movie of it, but they used the music and used the lyrics of the music to help them tell that story. And that really helped students to understand what they meant by that. When Colehouse is singing, and he and Sarah, you know, what he wants for his son. He wants him to go to Harvard. He wants him to be well educated. He wants him to be accepted as a man and all of this. And Colehouse Jr. doesn't live to see that, but he's putting that in his seed, and students saw that. And I think one of the reasons that it resonates for students is music is a universal language, and music is really what makes the world go round. So they got that. They were really able to get into that.
Okay. Do we have, if you have a question real quick, you know how to use the reactions button down at the bottom of Zoom and raise your hand. So that, because there are a lot of people on here. If the chat is not working, we make sure there's no hands raised. Okay. All right, I don't see any hands. So what I'm going to do is just let's do a real quick lightning round, closing question for the panelists. And, you know, I guess I'll start with you, Dr. Adams, about what is it that you hope audiences, we've talked a lot about the artists and the things, but what do you hope audiences will take away from this production when they see it?
Well, one thing I think that they're going to see is we've come a long way, but have we really? I don't think it's going to be any way that they watch Ragtime, that they listen to it, you know, with their eyes open, watching and listening, eyes closed, but still realizing that we've got work to do. That even though we have our iPhone 13 now, and many people or more people of color are living in Belle Meade and are working places that they thought they never could enter, there are still places that doors are closed. I said something in class the other day, and it was like an eye opener for students. And I said something about, you know, I'm not excited when someone says, "Oh, I don't see color." And I said, then if you don't see color, you don't see me. And students said, wow, they never thought of it that way. We're talking a lot about this diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I hope what this does for the Nashville community is that it says very clearly that this is the time, this is the place, and we are the people to really start not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, and really being intentionally inclusive of all, and making it your daily dose of doing to make people feel seen and valued and heard and respected, and that they belong.
Excellent.
That's
Thank
what I
you.
hope happens. That's what I hope happens.
Fingers crossed. Commander
Fingers crossed.
Laura.
Yeah, I think looking at it, I think I want people to see the reality of what people have gone through. I think that's a big thing, is just understanding the reality of what the history of policing and these type of situations have been in the past. But I also wanted to, apart from seeing where it's been, like Dr. Adams said, I think that we've come a long way. Now, are we where we want to be? No, but I think we're going in the right direction. I think that there's things that, we still need to work on, and we're never going to be a perfect department. We're never going to be a perfect, at least here in Nashville. Again, we're never going to be a perfect department. We're always going to have issues because we're human, and we're going to make mistakes. But I think that we are going in the right direction. I'd like people to give us the opportunity to make those changes. And I think, for us, I think, having our Black police chief that grew up here, and he's faced some of the, racism himself. And he says, I want to change the way things are done here. And he's changing policies, and he's changing different things, the way we police, so that we can go in the right direction. Is it going to end with him? No, we're going to have to keep on moving forward. And as times change, we've got to evolve with them. And we've got to continue doing the very best we can to serve the people here the best we can, and really try to, again, empathize and understand that not everybody's going to agree with us. Not everybody's going to understand, or not everybody's going to be as supportive as we'd like them to be, because again, they've gone through a lot, and they've been traumatized by a lot of things that happened in the past. We want to just change the next generation, let them know, hey, listen, the things that your grandparents went through, your parents went through, we're not going to let you go through. We're going to try to change and make things better. It's going to take a lot of work, but we're up for it. And I think, like I said, we're going the right direction. We got a long way to go, but we're going the right direction. So
Good. Well, as I said before, you have your work cut out for you, but appreciate the effort and commend you on making it. Crystal, what are your thoughts?
Well, for me, my hope is actually kind of the same that I tell my clients, and that is, go into a situation, go into this process with an open mind. If you're open to receiving something from it, you usually will get something. So as you go into, this experience of watching this play, you will probably get caught up in the lights and the artistry and the costumes and the music, and that's all fantastic. You should. But I think you can also, if you also open yourself up to receiving something more, then it will be worth every penny. So go into it with an open mind, and I think you will receive something great.
Okay, thank you. Claude, I'd like your thoughts about what you hope the takeaway is.
I hope that the takeaway for the audience is the same effect that the reading the book of Frederick Douglass did for me. Somebody who was sold into slavery at 7 years old and was able to teach himself how to read and write and free himself from slavery, and help so many other people get freed, and also was a major contributor to the abolition of slavery by telling his story, by shedding a light on the truth. And I hope that it wakes people up and gets people into action, gets people working, and that really Nashville looks in the mirror, looks at America, and looks at Nashville, and looks at the impact to people's real lives of displacement through gentrification, things like that. Consider the impact that we could have by funding some of Nashville's community-based programs, such as Gideon's Army, who are doing great work in the community. Consider ending, think about what it would be like when there's no mass incarceration, when there's no color blindness, because when, as you know, Dr. Adams said, if you don't see color, you don't see me. If you don't see color, you don't see diversity. And if you don't see color, you're choosing to be blind. And I hope that it also challenges the status quo, because change doesn't come unless there is a push. And I hope that when the people see this, that it inspires them to not only be the change that is needed, but to actually see that there is a need for change, and that there is a need, to be involved, and a need to do something, and that they realize that their voices count. Their two cents, matters, and their 2 feet count, and that they will take action for change.
Hopefully it will be motivating like you just described. Thank you, Claude. Dr. West, final word.
Enjoy the music, enjoy the dancing, enjoy the choreography. It's brilliant. But pay attention to the story. And if you do, remember it could have happened in Nashville 100 years ago, and that it could still happen in Nashville today. But if we work together, much as my fellow panelists have said, we remain truthful and open up ourselves, it doesn't have to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, all our panelists. I just want to say, there's a quote of mine that I like, as someone who's always been a supporter and participant in the arts. And it goes something like, art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. And I think that there is some significance in applying that quote to this experience around ragtime, because it's ultimately about crossing divides and finding unity, and redirecting our painful past toward a more hopeful future in this country. So I hope that's what audiences will take away from it. And I commend Nashville Rep as well on opening its season with this very important and impactful production. And I'm going to toss it back to Naved, but thank you all for joining us, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you all so much. We are actually officially out of time. So thank you so much, Claude, Dr. Adams, Commander Lara, Ms. Owens, and Dr. West. Thank you so much for your thoughtful dialogue tonight. And Ms. Turner, Latanya, thank you. We're so grateful for your time in moderating this valuable discussion. Please head over to our website, nashvillerep.org, to purchase your tickets for Ragtime the Musical in TPAC'S Polk Auditorium, November 11th through the 14th. All season ticket packages are also available for sale now. And thank you to all of the community members who stuck with us through some technical issues tonight. We wish you a safe and happy Halloween and look forward to seeing you at the theater this season.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
This was wonderful. Thank you very much.
This was
I'll
wonderful.
see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you. This was great.
It's so good to see you.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you, Claude.
All right.